Poor Grace. Such a pitiful girl. Her parents both passed away so suddenly. But what's there to worry about? Isn't she already engaged to that boy Ethan from the Smith family? Well, it's quite a stroke of luck for the Smith family, isn't it? Everyone knows Grace's parents made good money over the years, traveling far and wide as drivers. And now that the driver's position in town is open, it'll probably go to Ethan. I sat quietly in the middle of the crowd, the buzzing of their gossip filling my ears. Only now did I dare to believe I had really been reborn. It is now the year 1977, reborn to the moment right after my parents died in that car accident, when the village chief was organizing a meeting to decide my future. Ethan's parents, standing nearby, wore smug smiles. Soon, they pulled me into their arms, wiping away fake tears as they declared, "Everyone, don't worry. Grace has long been engaged to our son Ethan. Of course, we'll take responsibility for her. From now on, she'll be under our care." I looked over at Ethan, who stood not far away. At this moment, his youthful face was full of impatience. I knew he was eager to leave. He was rushing to meet Summer by the river. He couldn't care less about today's discussion. Either it didn't matter to him, or he was confident that things were already settled. After all, we'd grown up together, childhood sweethearts. He thought that with my parents gone, I'd have no choice but to rely on him. "Well, let's settle it then," the village chief started to say. I refused to marry into the Smith family. I interrupted firmly, cutting him off mid-sentence. Under the shocked and incredulous gazes of Ethan's parents, I enunciated every word clearly. "I'm already 18 years old. I can take care of myself. There's no need to trouble Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Besides, Ethan and I are just ordinary friends. Our so-called engagement was merely a verbal agreement between our parents, which doesn't hold any weight in this day and age. This is a new era. We can't cling to outdated practices like this. And one more thing. I suggest opening up the driver's position in town for fair competition. Leadership has made it clear. We must avoid favoritism and bureaucracy. Just because Ethan and I had a prior engagement doesn't mean he should get the position without proper consideration. People like Uncle Peter and Uncle John in the village deserve a fair chance too." As I finished speaking, some faces in the crowd lit up with satisfaction, while Ethan's parents' smug smiles completely disappeared. Ethan turned to look at me, his eyes filled with confusion and disbelief, and a trace of disdain. "Ah, maybe Grace and Ethan had a little spat," someone whispered. "Village chief, how about we postpone such a big decision for a few days? Grace living alone is bound to lead to trouble. We can't just let her have her way," Ethan's parents quickly suggested, unwilling to let their prize slip away. The village chief thought for a moment and nodded. "All right, we'll revisit this in a few days. For now, Grace can choose where she wants to stay. But as for the driver's position, she has a point. We'll open it up for everyone to apply and ensure fairness." Ethan's face turned sour, like he had swallowed a fly. As soon as the crowd dispersed, he dragged me to a secluded spot. "What do you mean by this?" he demanded. "The driver's position was already mine. Do you realize how many people are eyeing that opportunity? Yet with one word, you've taken it away." Ethan clicked his tongue, his brows furrowing in frustration. Just then, Summer appeared, practically shoving her way between us as if she were guarding her territory. "Grace, are you upset because Ethan wanted to take me out to play? But joking about Ethan's future like this is wrong of you," she said with a pout. I studied Summer's fair, delicate face and her soft, slender hands untouched by hard labor, completely unlike someone who'd worked in the fields. In my previous life, Summer had been sent to our village as part of the Educated Youth Program and was assigned to the Smith family. Ethan, who had never met anyone from the city before, was captivated by her. The two of them grew closer, their relationship filled with subtle flirtation, while I remained in the dark, naively believing they were simply like siblings. Ethan had even flattered me with small gifts, a few eggs, a bit of candy, claiming Summer was too young to do hard labor and asking me, as his future wife, to take on her share of the work. I foolishly agreed, working twice as hard. I can still remember my calloused, cracked hands and sun-worn face, envying Summer's smooth skin as I stood before Ethan. He had scoffed at me, his voice dripping with mockery, like a blade cutting into my pride. Some people are just born lucky. Whatever you think doesn't matter. Stop smearing those useless herbal pastes on your face. Summer uses imported face creams. Back then, my face flushed red with embarrassment, and I angrily threw away the herbs I had secretly dug up in the mountains. I had been applying those herbal pastes at night, only after everyone else was asleep, thinking no one would notice. But Ethan's words effortlessly crushed my confidence and made me feel worthless. In my past life, I hadn't pieced everything together until Summer mocked me while I lay bedridden. I had spent my entire life working like a mule for Ethan and Summer. This time, I wanted to see how Summer would maintain her natural beauty after working in the fields every day under the sun and wind. None of your business. Who do you think you are to meddle in my affairs? What Ethan does has nothing to do with you. Are you two together or something? I had been given a second chance at life, and there was no way I would let these people walk all over me again. You're talking nonsense. Summer and I are just like siblings, Ethan said, his face darkening, as if I had struck a nerve. Stop making a fuss. I know you're just jealous of my relationship with Summer. How about this? If you go to the village chief and tell him to save the driver's position for me, I'll take you out for some fun, he said, waving his hand dismissively like he was doing me a favor, a smug expression on his face. I couldn't be bothered to respond. I turned on my heel and left. As I walked away, I heard Ethan's parents approaching him, asking how things were going. Don't worry, Ethan said nonchalantly. I'll take her out and make her happy again. You know how much Grace loves me. I scoffed to myself and returned home. There. I went to the cellar and began digging in a hidden corner. After a long while, I unearthed a wooden box. When I opened it, it was filled with items that looked old and valuable. In my past life, I had taken this box with me when I moved into the Smith's home. I'd kept it as a memento, but years later, the items inside had become highly sought-after antiques. Ethan had sold these things to fund the start of his business. These were heirlooms from my family, and this time, I would use them to carve out my own path. Few days later, the driver's position was officially assigned to Uncle Peter, our neighbor. When Peter's wife heard the news, she brought me a sack of grain as thanks. I tried to refuse, but she held my hands firmly, her face filled with gratitude. We couldn't have done it without you, Grace. There's no way Peter would have gotten the job otherwise. Your parents were always so kind to our family. If you ever need help, come find me. Her kindness warmed my heart. After she left, my peace was abruptly shattered when Ethan stormed into my home, kicking the door open. His eyes were cold and menacing as he confronted me. What are you trying to do? Didn't I make myself clear? Now look at what you've done. The driver's position was snatched by someone else. How am I supposed to support you now? I knew Ethan wasn't just angry about losing the job. He was upset because he had promised Summer that he would save up for a few months to buy her a watch. Watches were considered a luxury item at the time. In my past life, I had thought Summer's watch was a gift from her parents. I didn't realize that Ethan, who wouldn't even buy me a few cents worth of candy, had spent $120 on a watch for her. Support me? Your work points don't even add up to mine. What are you going to support me with? Your words. I shot back sarcastically. Ethan's face turned red with anger. You're out of control. Do you believe I'll really refuse to marry you? You're an orphan now. No parents. No family. Let's see who else would want you. Go ahead. Don't marry me. Anyone else would be better than you. I retorted. Ethan stared at me for a long time, his expression unreadable, before he finally softened his tone. I know you're just upset because of your parents' sudden death. Don't say things you'll regret. We've known each other for over 10 years. No one will treat you better than I do. All I felt for Ethan now was indifference. His so-called care for me in my past life amounted to taking me away from my hometown after marriage, disappearing without a trace, and using the inheritance my parents left me to start a business and live happily ever after with Summer. Meanwhile, I was left behind in the countryside to care for his parents, raise his child, and shoulder all responsibilities alone. Eventually, I worked myself to death, succumbing to illness far too early. I initially didn't want to engage with him any further, but then I remembered. In just a year, The college entrance exams would be reinstated. Having been reborn, most of the knowledge I once had was now a blur. I needed to dedicate more time to studying, and I couldn't let fieldwork burden me anymore. I adjusted my posture slightly, forcing myself to put on the same adoring expression I used to wear around Ethan. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "Since my parents passed away, I felt so insecure. You said no one treats me better than you. What do you mean by that exactly?" Relief washed over Ethan's face. He thought I was still as gullible as before. "Look at it this way," he said. "Your parents are gone, and my family is the only one willing to take you in. Isn't that enough to show how much we care for you?" I kept my inner thoughts to myself. If not for the inheritance my parents left behind, his family would have kicked me out long ago. "You're right, Ethan. You really are the one who loves me the most. I've just been so muddled since my parents died. Could you help me with the fieldwork I'm supposed to do?" Ethan's face stiffened, and for a moment, it looked like he was about to lash out and call me delusional. But then he seemed to remember his parents' plan to keep me in their grasp long enough to get their hands on my inheritance. He held back. "You're going to be my wife someday. Of course. It's only natural for me to help you," he replied, feigning generosity. "You're the best, Ethan," I said, pretending to be touched. I ran back into the house and gathered a pile of old, useless junk to give him. Ethan, who had been basking in his triumph in the courtyard, froze awkwardly. In the past, whenever he visited, he would drop hints about things his family needed. I would always oblige, gifting him items like the milk powder my mother had bought for me or household appliances. Not this time, I silently scoffed. Never again would I let him take advantage of me. Now that Ethan was helping me with the fieldwork, I was happy to let him do it. Meanwhile, I had someone bring me a pile of books from the city so I could study at home. The Smith family relied entirely on Ethan's work points to sustain themselves. My parents had only agreed to the engagement because they thought Ethan was honest and dependable. I understood that to manipulate someone, you couldn't rely solely on pressure. You also had to offer occasional rewards. So, I occasionally gave Ethan $1 or $2 from my parents' inheritance, just enough to keep him sweet on me. As for Summer, her life was no longer as comfortable. Without me to take on her share of the fieldwork, Ethan had to do his own work, mine, and hers. Over time, resentment toward her inevitably built up. One day, as I passed the fields, I saw Ethan teaching Summer how to water the crops. Summer, standing to the side, looked as if she was about to cry. "You said that if I moved in with your family, I wouldn't have to do any work. You're such a liar," she whined. Ethan tried to comfort her with gentle words, but eventually, his patience ran out. "Grace is only a year older than you," he snapped. "Why are you so much more delicate than she is?" I nearly burst out laughing when I heard that. In my previous life, their love had seemed unshakable, as though forged from gold. Now, seeing this side of them, it all seemed so trivial. Ethan eventually managed to calm her down. Later, when they went to the market in town, I happened to be there too, buying the latest batch of study materials. When Summer saw me, she eagerly grabbed my hand and called me sister-in-law with a sweet smile. I knew immediately that she wanted something from me. Sure enough, she picked out several dresses, a few bags of sesame cookies and crispy pastries, and even 2 pounds of pork. While trying on clothes, Ethan adjusted her collar with an intimacy that made them look like a couple, helping her try on clothes. "And now you're practically holding her in your arms. You two seem really close." Hearing my voice, everyone around instantly turned to look at Summer. She hastily pulled away from Ethan, flustered. "Sister-in-law, you've misunderstood. Ethan was just fixing my crooked collar," she stammered. Ethan, thinking I was jealous, scolded me sharply. "What nonsense are you spouting? Summer is a virtuous girl. Are you trying to ruin her reputation with baseless accusations?" Feigning hurt, I lowered my head. "But so many people say they've seen you washing her feet with your own hands, buying her all kinds of things, and treating her way better than you treat me." Summer's face turned pale as the crowd's attention fixed on her. In the past, she had deliberately acted intimate with Ethan in front of me to provoke my jealousy. Knowing I wouldn't dare say anything in front of others, I would just quietly cry on my own. She must have thought I'd react the same way this time. But to her shock, I directly exposed her and Ethan's behavior to everyone. The crowd's chatter could have drowned her. At this moment, Ethan suddenly shouted angrily, stepping toward me and pushing my shoulder. "Grace, have I spoiled you too much? What are you? Some kind of petty tyrant? Jealous of everyone? Apologize to Summer right now." "It's fine, Ethan," Summer said with a sob, her eyes red as she looked at me. "Sister-in-law is from the countryside and hasn't been to the city. She only sees things from a narrow perspective. Don't blame her. See how kind Summer is?" Ethan said, a trace of arrogance on his face, as if her generosity was only natural. "And as her sister-in-law, you should make up for this. Why don't you pay for what she's picked out?" "Sure," I replied with a faint smile, walking toward the sales clerk surrounded by the crowd. "Everyone, let me pay first," I announced. "Summer says I'm just a country girl and don't understand city manners. Let me buy her something as an apology." I pulled out a handful of bills from my pocket, just about to hand them over when someone's hand pressed down firmly on mine. "Grace, what are you apologizing for? It seems more like someone's trying to take advantage of you now that your parents are gone," said Aunt Linda, our neighbor, pointedly glancing at Summer. "What's wrong with being from the countryside? Do city folk think hugging and cuddling with someone else's fiancé is considered proper etiquette? We wouldn't dare imagine such things." Summer had been in our village for 2 years, always presenting herself as sweet and kind. But Aunt Linda's words caused the crowd's opinion of her to shift. The way they looked at her changed. Summer grew increasingly flustered, her eyes reddening. "That's not what I meant," she protested. Ethan leaned close to me and whispered, "You're the one who caused this mess with your nonsense. Now everyone's cornering Summer. Fix it. Now." I pulled away from Aunt Linda's hand and handed the money to the clerk. "It's fine, Aunt Linda," I said calmly. "I consider Summer a good friend. This isn't a big deal. I've been buying things for her for a long time anyway." My tone was casual, but the meaning behind my words changed as it reached the crowd. When my parents were alive, they had been kind to many people in the village. Hearing that I had been buying things for Summer all this time, many of them felt indignant on my behalf, their first instinct being to take me to the village chief. Summer was a city girl, while I was an orphan. For her to take advantage of me this way seemed outrageous to them. Realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, Summer panicked. Ethan quickly stepped in to block the crowd, saying, "Everyone, this is a misunderstanding. I'm Grace's fiancé. Since her parents passed away, I've been her only family. And as for Summer, she's my sworn sister. It's only fair for a sister-in-law to buy a few things for her little sister. There's no need to trouble the village chief over this." Hearing Ethan's words, everyone turned to look at me. I knew they were waiting for my response. After all, the older women in the crowd had watched me grow up and understood the feelings I once had for Ethan. They weren't worried about Summer's situation. They only feared that their intervention might make Ethan dislike me. Their concern warmed my heart. In my past life, after my parents passed away, I had clung to the Smith family as if they were my lifeline. I was terrified of being abandoned and went out of my way to please them, ignoring the kindness and support of others around me. Now, seeing these familiar faces again brought a renewed sense of warmth. I didn't want to disregard their goodwill, but I also couldn't afford to fall out with Ethan just yet. After all, the college entrance exams were still some time away, and I needed his labor to help with the fieldwork. "How about this?" I said. "Let Summer write me an IOU and sign it." From the corner of my eye, I saw relief flash across Summer's face, and Ethan's expression relaxed into satisfaction. I smiled slightly and added kindly, "And let's have Ethan's parents sign it as well. After all, Summer is sponsoring their family, so it's only fair to have someone act as a guarantor. If she disappears, how else would I recover the money?" Summer's smile froze instantly, and her expression turned sour as she glared at me with resentment. I knew her plan all along. She was counting on returning to the city one day when her parents would secure her a good job. From thousands of miles away, she wouldn't care about these trivial village matters. But if Ethan's parents were involved, things would be different. Right now, they treated Summer kindly, mostly because of Ethan's feelings for her. And since she was from the city, They saw her as a potential trophy wife Ethan could show off if they ever moved back to the city. However, if Summer incurred a significant debt with Ethan's parents as guarantors, they would surely feel uneasy. No one would be happy with that burden hanging over them. Later, Summer approached me in private, her voice low and pleading. "Grace, don't you want to marry Ethan? If you cancel this debt, I'll make sure Ethan is completely devoted to you." Feigning confusion, I tilted my head. "How would you make Ethan devoted to me? Do you know him better than I do?" Summer was at a loss for words, her face flushing with frustration. In the past, my foolishness had been so deeply ingrained in people's minds that she couldn't be sure whether I had seen through her relationship with Ethan or not. If I hadn't, her words would only expose her guilt, and I might demand repayment out of anger on the spot. In the end, Ethan somehow convinced his parents to sign the IOU. I wasn't surprised. He was still infatuated with Summer and had likely promised them something in return. But Summer's life wasn't as comfortable as before. Her complexion no longer glowed as it once did, and she rotated between the same two outfits. I heard that the rest of her clothes had been taken by Ethan's mother and sold off cheaply. As the announcement of the reinstatement of the college entrance exams approached, my anxiety grew. It was the first year of exams, and no one knew what the questions would be like or how difficult they might be. I lacked confidence and could only study harder. During this time, Ethan came to visit me a few times. Perhaps he felt unsettled by my lack of attention toward him. I no longer clung to him as I once had. One day, he took the initiative to bring me to a shop in town. Ethan pointed to the gold rings and bracelets displayed in the store and said dismissively, "Grace, pick out a few and buy them. Consider it your dowry." With my money? I raised an eyebrow. He hesitated for a moment before responding. "Of course. Your parents left you plenty of money, didn't they? Buying a ring and bracelet won't cost much. Besides, your money will eventually be mine after we get married. Think of it as spending it a bit early." I let out a cold laugh, and Ethan's fragile ego immediately flared up. "Grace, don't be ungrateful. The fact that I'm willing to marry you is already more than you deserve. Do you know of any other man who would go out of his way to buy gold rings and bracelets for his wife?" His increasingly defensive tone only revealed how insecure he truly was. Watching him act like he was doing me a huge favor, I couldn't help but sneer. Using my money to buy me gold jewelry and expecting me to be grateful? What a joke. In my previous life, I would have been overjoyed by even the smallest gestures from him, never questioning the meaning behind his words. I would have simply felt grateful that he was thinking of me at all. But before Ethan could respond, I turned and walked out. "There's no rush to buy anything now. Let's wait until you can afford it yourself," I said over my shoulder. As I left without hesitation, a flicker of unease flashed through Ethan's mind. This was actually Summer's idea. She had noticed that I'd been acting differently lately, and had suggested that Ethan loosen the reins a bit. According to her, giving me a small benefit, like letting me buy myself gold jewelry, would keep me happy and ensure I stayed loyal to him. In Ethan's mind, I was supposed to forgive everything, throw myself into his arms, or at least give him some money, which he could then use to buy things for Summer. He hadn't expected this outcome. The news of the nationwide reinstatement of college entrance exams spread to every household via radio, bringing a wave of excitement and hope. I finally felt at peace. If I could get into college, I would dedicate myself to studying and contributing to the country. If not, I would take my parents' inheritance and explore the world, places Ethan had seen in his past life. I would see for myself this time. It wasn't just me. Ethan, Summer, and even some of our peers in the village had picked up their books and begun studying upon hearing the news. Time flew by. Months passed, and by the time our exam results were out, I had nearly forgotten the weight of the anxiety I carried. The day I received my acceptance letter from Beijing University, it felt like a boulder had been lifted off my chest. I couldn't put into words how terrified I had been of failing. Thankfully, the result was good. Another boy from our village was also admitted to a decent university, but Ethan and Summer were not so fortunate. They couldn't accept their failure and even went to the town office, accusing others of stealing their acceptance letters. The town officials paid them no mind and locked them in a room for a lecture before sending them back. Defeated and humiliated, when the news of my success spread, The kind neighbors who had watched me grow up each brought small gifts to celebrate. They held my hands tightly and said, "Grace, don't think it's much, but this is what we can offer. You're the pride of our village, the first to go to college. Your parents would be so proud. It's our duty to make sure you succeed." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I nodded earnestly. "Thank you, everyone. I promise I won't forget my roots. If I make something of myself, I'll be sure to repay your kindness." Just then, an inappropriate chuckle broke the warm moment. I turned toward the sound and saw Ethan's parents. Completely unbothered by the disapproving looks of those around them, they eagerly pulled me into their house. Inside, I immediately noticed Ethan and Summer sitting in the courtyard. Ethan's first words upon seeing me were, "Hand over your acceptance letter to Summer." I glanced at Ethan's parents in confusion. I had already guessed their intentions. They wanted to take my acceptance letter and give it to Ethan. But now, they wanted to give it to Summer instead? Ethan's devotion to Summer was undeniable. But what would happen if I refused? I was curious to see how far they'd go. "Grace, I promise," Ethan said eagerly. "If you give your college spot to Summer, I'll immediately pick a date for our wedding. After that, we can go out and explore the world together." "Explore the world?" I repeated, pretending to consider it. Ethan's eyes lit up, thinking I was moved by his words. "Exactly. Things are gradually loosening up now. If we leave this place, who knows what opportunities we might find." I had to admit, despite Ethan's flaws, his ability to sense changes and adapt quickly was why he became successful in my past life. "All right," I said thoughtfully, "but why give it to Summer? Don't tell me it's because you see her as your little sister. Could it be you too?" "Of course not," Ethan interrupted, panicked. He tried to explain, but his words faltered. Eventually, his parents interjected, dragging the conversation in another direction and avoiding the topic altogether. That evening, Ethan's parents insisted I stay for dinner. I pretended to help in the kitchen but paused at the doorway when I overheard their conversation. "Do you really plan to give the college spot to Summer?" Ethan's father asked hesitantly. "Wouldn't it be better to let Ethan have it instead?" "You don't understand," his mother replied. "Summer's parents are well connected in the city. Once she graduates and makes a name for herself, she can pave the way for Ethan." But what? She's already slept with our son. Do you think she'll leave him now? If Ethan doesn't make something of himself, we can always rely on her. And don't forget, Grace's parents must have left her a fortune. Ethan will need that money to get started. Once he's successful, we can kick her out. Every word of their scheming reached my ears. I smiled to myself. Fine. Let them enjoy their delusions for a little while longer. In the days that followed, Ethan treated me like a prized possession, terrified I might change my mind. Summer, emboldened, came to me directly. "Grace, I have to thank you. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have the chance to go to college. You should stay in this little village and live your life with Ethan," she said smugly, her tone dripping with condescension. I knew she was mocking me, laughing at how I had supposedly given up my college spot and remained beneath her in every way. Lowering my head, I played along. Marrying Ethan and spending my life with him is my dream. I'm already content. Summer covered her mouth, laughing delicately. She nudged Ethan playfully with her elbow, as if sharing an inside joke. Ethan, hearing my response, seemed satisfied. Still, there was a flicker of something else in his expression, perhaps doubt or suspicion. Although he had noticed my odd behavior recently, my apparent submission reassured him. As I lowered my head, Ethan used the moment to grope Summer's backside, the two of them exchanging flirtatious glances right in front of me. The sight made my stomach churn. Ethan kept urging me to hand over my acceptance letter to Summer, but I played coy, giving him a bashful smile. "I'll give it to her on our wedding day," I said sweetly. Relieved, Ethan immediately began making arrangements for the wedding, complete with drums and fanfare. Meanwhile, I discreetly met with the village chief and Aunt Linda, finalizing my plans. By the time everything was settled, I was already on a train heading to Beijing University. Coincidentally, it was the same day Ethan had scheduled our wedding. A few months into my university life, I finally felt the full weight of my rebirth's blessings. One afternoon, While shopping outside campus, I spotted a familiar figure. Ethan. He blocked my path, his eyes bloodshot with anger. Grace, how could you be so heartless? You stole Summer's chance to go to college. Do you know you've ruined her life? His outburst drew the attention of everyone around us. Given how recently the college entrance exams had been reinstated, his accusation quickly caught people's interest. Taking someone else's college spot was a serious accusation. I let out a cold laugh. You're saying I stole Summer's chance to go to college? Why don't you also mention what her exam score was? Should I contact the officials in charge of investigating these matters and let them know how your family pressured me to give up my spot for her? Ethan's confidence crumbled instantly. He stammered. Then come back with me and get married. Do you know how much humiliation you've caused my family by running away from the wedding? Everyone is laughing at me. Keep dreaming. I replied without hesitation. What's so great about college? Anyway, women should stay home, take care of their husbands, raise children, and serve their elders. Ethan argued, becoming more flustered. He couldn't understand why I seemed like a completely different person. He grabbed my hand, desperation creeping into his voice. Grace, didn't you say marrying me was your lifelong dream? If you come back with me now, I'll forgive everything. We can live a peaceful life together. Though his tone was sincere, his eyes betrayed his envy. In our past life, Ethan had never gone to college, and he'd always harbored a shred of jealousy toward those who had. Now, seeing someone who had once followed him around accepted into a prestigious university like Beijing University, he wanted nothing more than to drag me back down. At that moment, a voice interrupted us. Grace, is this your fiancé? It was my classmate, Mark Zhang. Ethan's anger flared when he saw Mark, and he became even more emotional. Well, Grace, is this your new man? I was wondering why you'd suddenly. Before he could finish, I slapped him hard across the face. Have you no shame? Do you really not know why I'm acting like this? In our past life, I had raised Ethan's son, cared for his parents, and worked tirelessly in the fields and at odd jobs in town to support his entire family. And his parents? Ethan would send them money behind my back, but they never told me. Instead, they constantly pretended to be poor, crying in front of me, convinced that I was hiding part of the inheritance my parents had left me. Even my son, who inherited Ethan's selfishness, conspired with his grandparents to keep me in the dark. I spent my entire life in hard labor, my body broken and riddled with pain. Near the end, Ethan brought Summer to flaunt their love in front of me, mocking my stupidity. Does the village know about you and Summer sleeping together? Did you really think I wouldn't find out about your little affair? The two of you, those despicable cheaters, still have the audacity to try and take my college spot? And how many favors has your family taken from mine? Borrowing money again and again, using your connection to me. Did you ever repay any of it? After my parents passed away, you couldn't wait to seize my family's inheritance. What am I to you? A servant in my own home. Ethan's face turned pale, then red, as he realized everything I said was true. He never imagined that I no longer cared for him, and was now willing to cut ties so completely. Grace, I know my family wronged you in the past, but do you really have to be this harsh? Why can't you forgive us? It's not like we were the only ones at fault, he muttered, his tone defensive yet guilty. Mark stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Grace is our classmate and a student that our professors admire. Do you think you can just show up here at Beijing University's gates and insult her? You're clearly just bitter because she's moved on with her life, and you can't stand it. What business is it of yours? Ethan shot back, his eyes blazing with fury. Grace is my fiancée. This is a private matter, and you have no right to interfere. I couldn't help but laugh at his pathetic arrogance. Ethan, do your parents know you came here unannounced? Do you really think I'd risk breaking off our engagement without having a backup plan? Why don't you go home and check on your parents? See how they're doing now. Ethan left quickly after that, and soon I received a letter from the village chief updating me on the situation back home. After I called off the engagement, the village chief followed my instructions, making it clear to everyone that there had never been an official marriage arrangement between our families. Everything had been verbal promises. I had also informed him about my situation and Ethan's parents' intentions. The village chief, being pragmatic, took precautions. I trusted that under the watchful eyes of the villagers, Ethan's parents wouldn't dare try anything against me again. As for the money Summer owed my family, that was now formally acknowledged as a debt. Ethan, however, found himself in a bind. Later, when I returned to the village to visit my parents' graves, I learned from the villagers that Ethan and Summer had left to seek their fortunes. Summer had failed to get into college, and her claims about her parents being influential officials in the city turned out to be lies. In reality, her parents were just ordinary workers with no ability to bring her back to the city. When Ethan found out the truth, he was furious and forced Summer to marry him. Years passed, and I visited the village again. Aunt Linda, who had been keeping my parents' belongings safe, brought out the box of heirlooms for me. "Grace, I've kept these safe for you all these years," she said, holding my hand and chatting endlessly. "You wouldn't believe it. Ethan's family is doing well now. I heard Ethan made a fortune outside and plans to come back to take his parents away." The news surprised me. I hadn't expected Ethan to find his way back to his old path. I couldn't help but marvel at how fate seemed to favor him. But Aunt Linda leaned closer and added, "His wife isn't Summer anymore." Though, it turned out that in their first year away, Ethan sold Summer off to one of his business partners. Summer, unwilling to accept her fate, retaliated by sabotaging several of Ethan's business deals and ruining his reputation. Soon, everyone knew Ethan's fortune had been built by selling his wife. Although Ethan managed to scrape by, his business never reached the heights it had in our past life. One day, as I passed Ethan's house, I saw his mother standing at the door. Her eyes were filled with resentment when she saw me, but she didn't dare approach. I'd heard about her plight. After I called off the engagement, Ethan's mother had been counting on my dowry to secure a storefront in town. When her plan fell apart, she became a laughingstock in the village. I had made sure Aunt Linda spread the word about the things Ethan's family had done. And when combined with the money Summer and Ethan owed me, no one was willing to help them. Their reputation in the village was ruined. It was clear why Ethan's family now hoped to leave with him. I let out a long breath, feeling a sense of closure. In my past life, I had wasted everything on Ethan's family, ensuring his parents lived comfortably until their deaths. But in this life, they faced the consequences of their actions. I had finally escaped the mire. This chapter of my life was over. Isn't that grace? After all these years, you can't even afford a trinket from a street stall. I turned and saw Summer. Her face, once so bright and beautiful, was now haggard and worn, resembling someone in their 30s. Her hair was dry and lifeless. So this was the business Aunt Linda mentioned, selling goods at a street stall. I felt no need to mock her. Seeing her like this was enough. "Take your time. No rush," the vendor said to me cheerfully, paying no attention to Summer as he focused on serving me. It was only then that I realized I had lingered at the stall for too long. The reason? The items on display were surprisingly trendy, standing out in stark contrast to the other stalls nearby. Summer continued her mocking tone. "Grace, don't say I didn't warn you. Buying stuff from his stall is a waste of money. It's all junk. But then again, it's not like you could afford anything here." I glanced at my outfit, admittedly plain since I had just come from home, but I knew in my heart that these items, while seemingly unimpressive now, would soon become incredibly popular. Just then, a weary, hoarse voice called out my name. "Grace." I turned toward the sound and saw a dark-skinned man with reddened eyes staring at me intently. Searching my memory, I hesitated before asking, "Ethan." Hearing me say his name, Ethan looked visibly emotional. Before he could respond, Summer grabbed his ear, screeching, "How dare you flirt with your old flame right in front of me?" Ethan's face immediately darkened. Frustrated, he shoved Summer away, and the two of them began shouting and cursing at each other in public. Disgusted by the scene, I turned my attention to the vendor. "How about we form a partnership?" After a brief discussion with the vendor, Ethan trailed behind me as I walked away. I sighed and stopped in my tracks. "Do you need something?" I asked. Ethan's expression was complicated, and I could tell he had overheard my conversation with the vendor about going into business together. I had proposed to fund the venture while the vendor handled the operations. "Grace," Ethan began, "why go through all that trouble? If we had gotten married, Wouldn't the money we made have been for the same household? Why involve an outsider? I couldn't help but laugh in disbelief. His shamelessness truly knew no bounds. Stop right there, I said coldly. We have nothing to do with each other anymore. And you already have a wife. Ethan opened his mouth to respond but remained silent. After a long pause, he finally said, I'm sorry. My family was wrong to treat you the way they did. My parents were unfair to you, and I shouldn't have gotten involved with Summer. You're 100 times better than that crazy woman. I only realize that now. His eyes briefly flashed with bitterness as he added, She ruined me. She destroyed my ability to have children, cutting off the possibility of me continuing my family line. And now she wants to leave me and disappear forever. I'll never let her go. I'll make sure she stays by my side until the end. I glanced at him in surprise, then instinctively looked downward. It was a fitting punishment. Summer was never a good person. In our past life, even though I was chronically ill, I could have lived longer if not for her cutting off my medical expenses, which led to my death. Now, it seemed Ethan was finally experiencing the suffering Summer had brought upon others. I had no interest in listening to Ethan's complaints. It was all meaningless. What happens between you and Summer is none of my business, I said firmly. I have no obligation to listen to your grievances. In fact, if we're being honest, our relationship is closer to that of enemies. So don't expect any sympathy from me. And if you think Summer is the person who hates you the most, let me tell you that my hatred for you isn't any less than hers. Let's make sure we never cross paths again. With that, I turned and walked away. The pain of my past life was behind me, and now it was finally my turn to find happiness.